So hi everyone, nice to see you all. My name's Verity Sayers, and I'm the head of Housing Solutions at West Northants Council. Here today to talk to you about the Housing Solutions Service and our functions. One of the key things I'll say at the start is that this is West Northamptonshire Council Housing Solutions. There is another session for North Northamptonshire. While we have very similar ways of doing things, there are slight differences in what we do. So if you need to know more about North Northamptonshire, please make sure you go on to that session as well. I'm joined here today by Kay Gilbert, the Housing Options Manager, and Toby Wallace, the Temporary Accommodation Manager. Tara unfortunately can't be with us today because she's sunning it up in Tenerife. But I'll be handling her sort of slides and making sure that I can answer any questions on her behalf. Kay and Toby will introduce themselves in a minute and give a little bit of an overview about what they do. But before we do that, I think it would just be helpful to go on to the next slide, please, Chloe, and to just look at how the Housing Solutions Service fits within the wider context. So the Housing Solutions Service is part of the Communities and Opportunities Directorate in West Northants Council. We have four main services within the structure. So we have the Allocations and Quality team, and that looks after the housing register and the triage and business support functions. We have the Housing Options team who provide the statutory service for customers who are presenting as homeless or threatened with homelessness. We have the Temporary Accommodation team that works very closely with the Housing Options team to provide accommodation for those who are homeless and meet the criteria for temporary accommodation. And then we have the rough sleeper team who support people who are rough sleeping or prevent some people from becoming rough sleeping within the community. So I will hand over to Kay Gilbert to give a bit of an overview about what the Housing Options team does within the wider service. So next slide, please. Thanks, Kay.
Thanks, Verity. Good afternoon, everybody. So as Verity said, I'm Kay Gilbert, the Housing Options Manager. So just in terms of an overview of what Housing Options do. So our responsibilities and duties are in line with the Housing Act and the Homelessness Reduction Act 2017. We work very within the Part 7 of the Housing Act. And our duties are to provide housing advice and assistance, and prevent homelessness and relieve homelessness wherever possible within the statutory legislation, and doing so within sort of 56 days. So in terms of preventing homelessness, our focus is to try and get in there as early as possible, to work with registered providers, excluders such as family, friends, and also sort of private landlords to see what we can do in terms of negotiation to prevent them from becoming homeless, and also looking at what options we can do and support we can put in place to keep them in the accommodation that they're in. So in terms of the statutory homeless decisions, we will look to assess that person's homeless application within the legislation and determine what duties are owed, if any, sort of in the long term, trying to again look at whether or not we can relieve their homelessness at the point that they do actually become physically homelessness per se. And when looking at relieving homelessness within the legislation, we have 56 days to do that, looking at what solutions we can sort of find them in terms of sourcing alternative accommodation. And for those households that do become homeless after the 56 days of the prevention duty, some of those cohort we may have a duty to provide interim temporary accommodation for, and those are the cases where we're looking at in terms of whether or not they meet the priority need threshold. Just looking at in terms of local policies and schemes within West Northamptonshire, we have the West Northants Allocation Scheme, which Verity will talk a bit more detail about later, the Homelessness and Rough Sleepers Strategy, and also the Landlord Incentive Scheme and our Housing Pathways, which includes our care leavers, those that are leaving prison, family and friends no longer willing, also our singles and couples without children, and also our domestic abuse pathway. I want to go on to the next slide. So in terms of the options, advice and support that we provide at West Northants, the majority of our top 3 approaches and reasons for approach to the service are end of tenancy, so those that are served with a Section 21, domestic abuse, and then family and friend exclusions. And then you've got there detailed just underneath some more of those examples of the reasons for our approach. So in terms of the advice and support that we can provide, as explained, we've got the landlord incentive scheme, whereby we can provide financial assistance to source alternative accommodation. We're able to mediate with family and friends again to try and look at that preventative option and try and sort of mediate with them and keep them in their family home. We have the money and debt advice service as well within West Northants, which will include accessing benefits and maximising their income. Also looking at, in terms of our domestic abuse cohort, looking at the sanctuary scheme and what legal remedies we have in terms of trying to keep them in their homes and looking at alternative options for them, as well as working closely with multi-agency partners. I want to go on to the next slide.
Thanks very much, Kay. So Toby, if you'd like to introduce yourself and give a bit of an overview about temporary accommodation, please.
Yeah, my name is Toby Wallace. I'm the Temporary Accommodation and Private Rented Sector Access Manager at West Northants. So the temporary accommodation journey would start once Kay's services deemed that a household approaching requires temporary accommodation. So our kind of legal remit is to identify a suitable offer of interim accommodation or temporary accommodation, or TA as it's more commonly known, and ensure that they're placed into an adequate provision that they can reside in on an interim basis whilst inquiries are made regarding their circumstances. Our accommodation currently ranges from more than 200 units of our own stock. That's houses and flats owned by the council and managed by MPH. We also have a portion in the rural areas which are managed by ourselves and held in the general fund. We also work closely with private providers who provide self-contained accommodation across West Northants, in addition to some shared houses. Approximately, currently that stands at over 500 units of accommodation on any given night. And we work independently with some private landlords and local housing associations leasing their properties to provide a more cost-effective method of providing interim accommodation. Our least favoured method of placement would be through hotels and guest houses, which we currently use on a nightly basis as well. As I mentioned, the key remits are for our placements to be safe and suitable accommodation, ensuring that buildings comply with the necessary gas and electrical safety. Again, we work with providers internally and externally to ensure that is happening. We would, upon placing a household into their accommodation, they're supported with housing benefit claims. We would then look to manage their rent accounts and ensure that customers adhere to their licence conditions. The licence that we go through with them is explained to them and read out to them verbatim during the sign-up process to ensure there is a clear understanding even for some of our most vulnerable customers. Day to day, this can include dealing with any issues that may arrive in terms of property maintenance, and again liaising with the necessary party to go about rectifying themselves, either that being ourselves, Northampton Partnership Homes, or the private nightly pay provider. As part of our job, we deal with many antisocial behaviour complaints. This can be from local residents, this can be from our residents regarding situations they may be in, and also living within hotels and shared houses. This is part of what we have to deal with. Also, in terms of moving customers on into their permanent accommodation, ensuring they're equipped and making sure they maybe have support through discretionary housing payments, ensure they've got adequate furniture to move into their permanent accommodation, and ultimately looking at the other side of the coin where customers who we no longer have a duty to, we may have to progress with evictions as well. Our current challenges is the level of demand. We've seen the number of households in temporary accommodation double in the last 2.5 years, and since and in this calendar year we've seen an increase of kind of over 20%. A lot of this demand is driven by homelessness approaches, and equally some of the challenges driving those levels are something that we will also feel when placing into temporary accommodation, utilising as many units of accommodation in the private rented sectors as we actually do, where you hear about increase in rents and mortgage interest rates increasing. That has resulted in the price we pay for temporary accommodation also increasing significantly, with costs in that respect increasing by just over 20%. There's also a finite supply of temporary accommodation within Northampton, so this has naturally led to an increased demand of hotel placements on a nightly basis, and these can range from anywhere, depending on the time of year, from £40 a night to £100 a night. We work extensively with partners, both internal and external. So there's a very close working relationship with colleagues in the Housing Solutions Service, because we are managing that unit of accommodation whilst they are assisting the person in their housing journey. We've also got the wider services within the council. So housing benefit is a key stakeholder within what we do, because again, they are responsible for paying a lot of the assessing and paying a lot of the claims which we make. And again, colleagues in the antisocial behaviour unit, again, there's regularly a crossover between our parts, and also colleagues at Northampton Partnership Homes. Again, they are responsible for managing a significant portion of our stock, and it's important that the quality of that stock, being our own, is something that we are proud of, and we work to minimise any void periods, so we're not wasting money on expensive nightly paid accommodation options. And again, going to partners externally, we've obviously got colleagues in adults and children, who again we work very closely with, because again, some of the customers we are providing accommodation with have complexity and needs which need to be met outside of housing as well. So there's commonly crossover with social workers and what have you, and advocates in the leaving care service. And then we work closely with the police, and that may be to execute kind of welfare checks on certain customers, and that's probably where we've seen some really good positive outcomes. The nature of some of the customers we place into temporary accommodation, we have had suspicions that people have been taken advantage of, be it through cuckooing or friends who are kind of overrunning their properties. We've had some really positive outcomes shared at kind of internal cuckooing forum, where we've then been able to expedite visits and moves out of accommodation, supported by the police and colleagues within our service, to ensure that people, be it young adults or anyone of any age, is safeguarded from that situation as quickly as possible. And again, there's been several examples where we've managed to achieve that. I think that covers everything I wish to say on temporary accommodation. But yeah.
Thanks, Toby. Thank you very much. Okay, we'll go over to rough sleepers. So it's probably quite timely to speak about rough sleeping today, because I bet most of you woke up and saw the frost and how cold it is today. We do have something called SWEP provision. So that stands for Severe Weather Emergency Protocol. And basically what that means is that we will provide temporary accommodation to absolutely anyone who needs it, who's rough sleeping in the area over a period of time where there are reduced temperatures, to safeguard people from the weather. So that's a really important part of what the rough sleeper team do. So it's poignant really to point that out at the moment. So a bit about what they do sort of day to day. So there are two main services: the street services team and the transitions and support and sustainment team. So within street services, we have duty officers going out and visiting people on the street and supporting them. And we also have the transition support and sustainment team, who make sure that when people are moved on, that we're actually maintaining where they're currently staying, because quite often there are people with complex needs who need that additional support, particularly with rough sleeping, but with housing solutions in general. We really rely on partners working with us to try and support us and our customers to sustain tenancies and find tenancies. That is really key for us, and particularly with the rough sleeping team, they work really closely with adult social care, with voluntary sector organisations, and various other health, that sort of thing, to make sure that we can really look after people holistically, not just the housing need, because often if you just provide the housing where there's complexities, that housing can break down without that other support around someone. Hospital outreach is again a focus of the rough sleeper team. So we're currently recruiting for a hospital outreach officer who will be able to go into the hospitals to provide that support to people who need a little bit of support to actually exit hospital placements in a safe way. And I've popped here about the core aims of the rough sleeper team, and these are aims sort of put in the homelessness and rough sleeper strategy because they're really important to us. So these are our values and what we wish to achieve. Firstly, being making rough sleeping rare, brief, and non-recurring. So we know that there are complexities to people that mean it's going to be very hard to completely end rough sleeping, but we want to make it so rare as much as possible. Reducing rough sleeping, creating a joined up pathway of support, so making sure that our partners are supporting us to make sure that we look after someone holistically, and helping people settle into homes where they can thrive. So making sure that we don't just put someone in their home and that's it. We provide that holistic support all the way around them. I'll go on to the housing register if that's okay, Chloe. Thank you. So many of you will probably have heard about the housing register lately. So there's been a significant change in that we have launched a new housing allocation scheme, and that was in April. Now that replaced 3 legacy council allocation schemes and brought all of social housing allocation into one in the whole of West Northants, which is a significant change. The other thing that we did within that is previously MPH looked after Northampton's housing allocation scheme, so we brought that in and created a new service through the housing allocations and quality team. So real significant change there. So just a bit of information about what the housing register actually is. So the housing register is the scheme laid out through the allocations policy, and that sets out who's eligible to apply for housing. So that's someone's immigration status. Who would not qualify? So that's things like whether someone has tenancy related debt, whether someone is a homeowner, whether someone is under 18, all of these things which might influence whether they qualify for the housing register or not. How applications will be assessed and the level of priority need awarded. So there are 4 priority bands, band A, B, C and D, A being the highest and D being the lowest. And there are categories within that influence what priority they're in. So for example, those who are statutory homeless are band A, and band D might be people who wish to move into sheltered accommodation but otherwise are adequately housed. And then we also outline within the scheme how we will allocate social rented housing. So we operate on a choice-based letting scheme, which means that we advertise properties on a weekly basis, and our customers are able to place a bid on whichever property they are interested in, as long as they qualify for that property. And at the end of that bidding cycle, we will assess who is in the most priority for that property. I've popped a link here about how you can find out more about the housing register. There's a wealth of information on the website at the moment. We are working on making it that little bit more robust, but there's a wealth of information on there already if you want to find out more, including the scheme itself, which is quite a lot of pages, it will definitely send you to sleep if you want to do some late night reading, but really important if you just wanted to reference something very quickly on there. And then I'll hand over to Kay to give us a little bit of an understanding about how you can refer customers if you're concerned about them being homeless or threatened with homelessness.
Thank you.
Sorry, Kay, just before we go on, I'm conscious there's a hand up, so I don't know if this colleague's got a question, and there's also a few questions in the chat. I didn't know if now was an okay time just to go over those, because I think it sort of relates to what information's just been shared.
Yeah, so my question is, I am a disability campaigner, and I just want to know, like, is there anything like we could do, like make our MP know or make posters or social media? Like, is there anything that we could be involved in? Like for the campaigner, I just want to know if there's anything that we could do.
Okay, yeah, so in terms of how you can get involved with working with us and sort of influencing policy, when we are looking at changing policies, we do look at consulting with people. And that will be a wealth of people. We'll try and get lots of information from people in a variety of ways, whether that be through the website, through working with people who we know we've already worked with. At the moment, there's nothing going through. So we've recently just adopted the new allocations policy. It's very recent where the homelessness and rough sleeping strategy came out. But there will be continuously over the years a lot of opportunity to get involved with consultation work. So yeah, that's where we really want to hear the voice of the customer and see you know how they're impacted. Chloe, are there certain ones on the chat? I'm just very quickly looking through. Are there ones that you can see?
Yeah, so there's a question from Nicola. She says the outreach team are good at being flexible. However, I have found that rough sleepers suffer as a result of having chaotic lifestyles, not being able to meet appointments, often removed from lists, etc. Is there a way of increasing flexibility for these people? And then she's also asked, can I ask about risk assessments for young, vulnerable females being made homeless due to not having recourse to public funds?
Okay, brilliant. So I'll take the first one first. So absolutely, Nicola, we absolutely need to provide flexibility for people who have complexities and need a little bit of support. We do, so we work under a legislative framework, so we do need to make sure that we meet the legislation that we work to, but there are ways and means that we can work around that. So an example that I quite often come across with the rough sleeper cohort because of their situation, they often don't have access to passports or birth certificates, and that's where the outreach team can support them to apply for identification, so that they can access the allocation scheme or the housing register or the homelessness process. There will be many examples of where we can provide additional support for people who have complexities. And I would urge you, if you do come across a case that you don't feel comfortable with and you don't feel like there's enough support in place, that you raise that with myself, with Tara, with Kay, with Toby, just to make sure that we are sort of auditing ourselves and making sure that we are doing what we need to do. Your second question is quite a tough one. So those who don't have recourse to public funds, unfortunately, through the homelessness legislation and the housing allocations legislation, we don't have a legal duty to support those people with housing. We can offer support through the for general advice and assistance through the homelessness statutory services, but also we can offer support and guidance through the rough sleeper team, where someone has no recourse to public funds. And we'd also try and work as closely as we could with adult social care to identify whether that person had any care and support needs as well. But absolutely, I think that's a huge gap nationally. So it's something that I've raised with our central government colleagues as well, that they're just we really suffer from not having enough options for people with no recourse to public funds. Chloe, any others that you want me to pick up on?
I think that's sort of all for now. So we'll move on if that's okay.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'll move on to Kay then. Thanks, Kay.
Thank you. So finally, in terms of if you've got any customers that require housing advice and assistance, we'd urge you to refer via our alert portal. This is under the duty to refer. So you can refer service users into the service, but what you will need to have is consent for the customer to ensure that we can provide them with ongoing support. And also provide their contact details and a bit of context in terms of why they need the support from the Housing Options Service and reasons why they may be at risk of homelessness. We've got a link here in the slides which we'll share at the end in terms of the sign up process for alert and to submit a duty to refer, entering your agency, and also obviously the details of the household and the consents that you can submit it. Thank you everybody for coming this afternoon.
Brilliant, thanks Kay. So that's it in terms of the presentation for us, Chloe. I'm really happy for us to answer any questions if there's anyone who has any questions, but otherwise I'll hand back over to you, Chloe.
Thanks, Verity. There's another question just popped up in the chat. How would this benefit with day centres? Because lots of day centres need help.
Okay, what's meant by that, Karen? What sort of help do day centres need?
Like the housing benefit and also the learning of the day centres. So like some of the day centres don't know about the housing benefit and also what they were saying about the service users of the housing for the day centres.
Okay, so in reference to housing benefit, so housing benefit doesn't actually sit within the housing solutions team. Housing benefit sits within our benefits service. We do have a money advice team within WNC who do support people with budgeting, finances, and accessing benefits, making sure that you're in receipt of all benefits that are needed. So there might be some capacity for the money advice team to provide that support, but also we've also got the voluntary agencies that support us, like Citizens Advice and Community Law Centre. So there's a wealth of opportunities to be involved with centres, with day centres, if there is a need to access some sort of support with housing benefit, there will be a wealth of people who are able to meet that. So yeah, definitely something for you to take forward with the likes of money advice and Citizens Advice. Okay. So Gilliard, so what is your statutory duty around high-risk domestic abuse approaches? Okay, so we do, so as Kay alluded to, domestic abuse is one of our main reasons for approaches here at WNC, and that's pretty typical nationally, unfortunately. So we have a statutory duty to provide advice and assistance for that person. So when they approach, we would be looking to complete a full housing assessment with them and ascertaining whether we have reason to believe that they are homeless and in priority need because of the domestic abuse situation. If we have that reason to believe, we will look at trying to accommodate them to make sure that they are safeguarded from the situation that they were in. We can look at working with our partners to provide refuge. For me, I find refuge really important because it provides that personal support, the advice and support and all of that sort of thing that goes with it in there. Or we can provide temporary accommodation. Now, within temporary accommodation placements, we look at safety. So we will look at, where someone's come from, what areas present a risk. We may look to do a dash risk assessment and refer to Marek if needed, so that we can get that support. We'll also look at whether there's any opportunity to refer to MASH if there are children involved and there's concerns around safeguarding of children. And then in terms of moving forward to make sure they're safe going forward, we'll look at a number of options. So some people wish to remain in the house that they were at risk of homelessness from because of the domestic abuse, because they want to stay near their support networks, etc. If that's the case, we would look at a risk assessment and putting things in such as civil and criminal orders, with the support of our police colleagues, as well as looking at things like sanctuary schemes. So placing sort of target hardening measures into someone's property so that they have more security, basically. But that is definitely something that we would only do if that person really wanted to remain in their property. We'd also look at other properties. So we might look at supporting that person onto the housing register. It might be that they have a housing association property currently, and the housing association can look at managed moves. It might be that they want to look at the private rented sector. It might be that they wish to move out of Northamptonshire entirely and actually approach another local authority. So I guess my answer to that is it's really varied. There are lots of options that we can consider with our customers, depending on what they want out of their approach, basically, and what's suitable for them. I don't know, Kay, Toby, if there's anything else that I've missed on that you want to come in with.
No, I think you've captured that.
Yeah, I did a good job. Okay, so Jessica's asked, do you connect with the North teams for those cases where staying in West locality isn't their wish? So absolutely, where we can. So there is a legislative framework that we have to work within. So we have something called local connection, and we do need to make sure that we satisfy that local connection criteria. What we can do, we don't do that regularly, but we can do is if someone doesn't have a local connection to an area, we can look at whether we can refer them over. But it is a case of that other local authority accepting them. So there is something called reciprocal arrangements where we can look at supporting one of their customers who wish to move over here and vice versa. But that's not just exclusive with Northamptonshire. We can look at doing that with anywhere within England, which is brilliant. But yeah, we work really closely with our colleagues in Northants, just generally at a strategic level. So it leads to having really good communication and support of one another. No problem. Okay. I think that might be it, Chloe.
I think so, thank you. Oh, there is someone just popped in the chat. Anyone with a substance misuse issues can refer to the Bridge programme for holistic wraparound support and housing advice. And there's a link in the chat, so I can circulate that after the session as well if anyone else would find that useful.